What is up, everybody? I am Jaso. We are joined back here for the third installment / session of our Roll20 for Dummies. I'm joined by Ringkaz / Slim / husband / Brian from Husband and Wife Stream. They're over on Twitch. That's all one word. You can check them out. They play a variety of games. They do lots of stuff with their community. It's very cool. You should go check them out. How are you doing tonight, Slim?
I'm doing great. I'll tell you, no, I didn't have a whole lot of nicknames growing up, and now I got like 4 or 5. That's pretty.
Yeah, I may never stop calling you Slim. That is just my name for you. We came up with that a long time ago, and it just stuck ever since.
I like it.
So last time where we left off, and if anybody joins at some point during the stream and you have questions about Roll20, about how to work things, about any prior questions to the settings or moving map layers, or just anything in general, ask away. I'll be trying to keep an eye on the Twitch chat and will do my best to answer as I see them come in. But if not, and you're just catching this as a rebroadcast or VOD or video on Twitch, I hope this is helpful to you. We have 2 other videos that we did previously. This is the third one in the installment of the Roll20 for Dummies, which is basically just walking you through the steps and how to figure out the Roll20 platform. We figured it would be a good time, especially considering that most people are still under quarantine. We're kind of coming back to I don't want to say normal life, but or we're coming out of quarantine slowly. But even so, it doesn't hurt. I know there's a couple other resources out there. I think even Roll20 themselves are putting out a couple how-to vids to help you out. So you may find a lot of different resources to help out. Hopefully this one coming from a DM who has played with this system, and Slim is a player who's played for, I mean, we've probably done this over 5 years or close to it. I know I've definitely DM'd at least 5 years at this point using Roll20 almost exclusively. I don't actually think, now that I think about it, I have never DM'd a game in person. It's all been through Roll20.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so I have definitely gotten my experience and cut my teeth on this platform, at least to the extent of being able to do things where I feel comfortably. I don't know the full extensive nature of Roll20, but I'll do my best to walk you guys through. So hopefully you find this helpful. You can always just leave a comment on the VOD or over on the YouTube page, which is GAWD_mode, if you have other questions, and I'll try to get back to you that way. If you miss the stream but still have a lingering concern or issue that you're trying to work out, I'll do my best to help. Also check out the Roll20 support area. It has documentation and everything that you can find that will be helpful for you figuring out Twitch, especially with some of the more, not Twitch, Roll20, that has some helpful tools for some of the more advanced features, breaking down things into the various layers on a map and figuring out fog of war and dynamic lighting. Be a little on the advanced side in terms of wrapping your mind around it. It's fairly intuitive, but there's some things that could, you may just be lost on and just want to actually ask a human being instead of trying to roll through documentation page after page figuring it out. So definitely hit us up if you have a question. Hit me up on Twitter too, GAWD_mode, and ask me there if you want. It doesn't matter. I'm happy to help because I want people to be able to figure out the platform that they feel comfortable with using so that they can either DM or, even if you're just a player, figure things out. So last time, in our previous 2 sessions, in the first session we covered just the broad expanse of not even jumping into a game yet, but just the generalities of the Roll20 website itself via the subscriptions, the marketplace, upload limits, and things like that. Just talking about personal profiles that you create, the pros and cons, so you can take a look at that. In the second session, we started to really dive into the game space itself, going over various things from the chat through your art library, the journal, jukebox in terms of your audio files, and the audio things you could find through various other platforms like tabletop audio, the settings and collections, things like that. So if you missed any of that, go check it out. we had mostly covered all of that, and I started to get into the left side of things that you guys can see here, which is more the actual map itself and the various toolbars that you can find over on this side, which is, there's not a ton to go through here. There's this left bar, and then we talked about the page toolbar at the top in terms of creating new new pages is what they call them on here, which is essentially new areas for you to shift from one place to another in terms of if you're going from one map to the other or bringing your tokens somewhere else. We kind of went over some of those things. So in this installment, we're going to just break it down. We're going to talk about the different layers of the actual play area over here, where you can see 2 icons from our Weird and Wild stream that we do on Friday nights. If you're interested, we do a fun homebrew thing Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern time that you can check out. And it's a 5th edition homebrew stream that has elements of Spelljammer and Planescape in there. It's a lot of fun, so go give that a watch if you're interested. But for now, we're going to dive right into just kind of using these tokens as examples. I'm going to briefly, just before we start throwing stuff in here, as me and you, Slim, we talked about before, I think the best way to tackle this is to kind of go through these tooltips on the left side, but also kind of play with the map as we do that. So you can kind of, if you're logged into both, take a look at what I'm doing over here on my end in this campaign, and if you want to kind of just follow along and slap some stuff in there. Even if you are not a subscriber to Roll20, you still have free assets that you can use. So even if you're someone who is checking this out, maybe you're not sure about the platform, or you're just trying to get used to it and you haven't subscribed or anything, you still have assets, you have tokens, you have maps you can use. So take a look at those things. They're definitely there to help get you into at least creating and building something without needing to go full in. So at the top here, we have at the left side in our tooltip bar over here, we have the arrow icon at the top. Most everyone who knows the computer is familiar with this. You have select and move, and then underneath pan view. And similarly, select and move is where you can select particular elements and icons, like Rink has his token here, and move it around. You can right click for various other options that we'll go over. And then the pan view, when you're using the select and move, the arrow cursor, you can always use your mouse wheel or the scroll bars to move around. The mouse wheel, depending on your settings, which is what we kind of talked about previously, under the settings, you can kind of set it to, instead of scrolling, zoom in and out, which I find helpful. And I use a combination of that and my scroll bars to kind of quickly get where I need to go. Similarly, if you, if you're trying to get to an area quick on your map and you want to pull your attention to it, but not only your attention as the DM, but also your players, if you hold down the mouse button, you're going to ping on your map. And that's going to basically show you what we have here, just a circle that expands, and it's kind of called pinging. And this can be used to show your players objects of interest. If you have a detailed map and you're trying to explain something to them and you want to point something out, Glacé's over here at a table and she sees a note on the table and I just want to ping that out to her where it is. You can just hold down the mouse button. That is useful, and all of your players can do that. So if they're trying to ask you about a particular something, they similarly can hold down their mouse button to ping and whatever their icon color is that they log in using. However, if you're trying to shift over to a particular area of the map and you also want to draw your players' attentions, you will hold down shift and then ping, and it will, as you see here, it is automatically dragging the view over to these spaces. And that's a great way to be like, over here, as you guys enter the room, you see this mechanical android shifting through 2 open doors that move to the sides, made of steel as it steps out. And you can kind of quickly draw their view over here so they get a look at whatever's happening on the map. That's a great way to do that. And then back on our toolbar, the pan view is, as you would guess, a way to use your mouse to kind of grab the map and pull it so that you can move across. It depends on whatever your playstyle is. If you feel more comfortable doing this than trying to zoom in and out your mouse wheel or trying to continually use the scroll bars, this may be an easier way for you to move around the map or just get a better view around. Did you have any questions before we really dug deeper, Slim, about anything we've covered so far, or just questions in general going forward?
At the moment, no. I think someone will pop up a little bit further in because I think some of the stuff you're about to get into was where I had a few questions. So
Okay. Another something to note as you are playing around with your map, if you are trying to show something off to your players, maybe it is a piece on your map that you have, maybe it's a monster or a character token, and you want to show that off to your players, but you want to be able to show a closer view of it, because typically when we play on these maps, we have as you guys kind of see here, this is more of a natural view, especially for you guys as a DMs. You guys will probably be zoomed out pretty far, just trying to keep the action and wherever these tokens are, whether they're monsters and everything, in their certain spots. But if you're trying to draw attention, if you use your mouse to select an icon or anything in the gaming space, it doesn't have to be a character token, it can be any element, and you Shift and then hit Z while you're holding Shift, it will create an expanded look of whatever that is you've highlighted. So if you do that whole spiel that I mentioned of this robot walking through these opening metal doors as it steps into the room, and you use your Shift ping to move over to that area, you can then select that token and then hold Shift and then press Z, and you could show it off to your players. Here's the mechanical android. You see steam fuming out of various exhaust pipes coming out of its back, and just kind of give them a better idea, because a lot of players have a little bit of a pulled out view, especially if they're using tokens on a map, so they can kind of get a view. But that helps keep immersion up, because again, if you think about it in a role-playing setting, although you are using a map to determine where characters are, technically when you're role-playing, you are in the eyes of your character. So if something enters the room, you'd want to show it to them closer. You want to have it be almost up in their face so they can get an idea. They can kind of continue to be immersed as they see this thing walk through the room and be able to look at it with good detail. So that's something that you can do to show off things to your players. Moving on from that and really tackling into, I think, something that you'll be interested in, Slim, and everyone else, is the layers on the playfield. I don't know if this has a specific term. I'm sure it may have. I'm just going to call it the play area, the playfield, where you're going to throw your stuff down at. Over here, you will notice that in Roll20, we have more than one layer. This is a very similar philosophy or teaching if you use Photoshop or Illustrator, that you have layers. And you, like the layers of a cake, you go from the bottom to the top. And these aren't necessarily things that have to go bottom to top, although the map and background and objects and tokens are specifically one over top of another. But just keep that in mind, that they serve different purposes and they're for different things. And each layer is unique in its own right. We'll go over that. So first off, as you see here, we want to click at the top. This is the map and background. This is the layer that you guys are going to use to put down your backgrounds, your maps, your elements that will help craft a world, a car that maybe crashed, a structure that has collapsed across the road. Maybe you want to even put a dead monster on the map layer, thinking that maybe it won't move all that much. Basically, this is a layer that is going to be more static in nature. At least my philosophy in DMing is you want to put stuff on the map layer that you don't want to have to worry about accidentally clicking when you are using the objects and tokens layer, which is what you're going to be primarily doing when you're running a game. So I like to make things that are going to go on the map layer obviously your map, but also other elements that I think to myself, I don't see the players moving this around all that much, and I don't want to accidentally click them. For example, sometimes I may put something on here that looks like a grassy field, and I like to decorate it outside of what they may already have set up in that image with some extra rocks and foliage. I don't want to accidentally click those things, and that can be especially troublesome when you try to drag click and you accidentally not only you meant to just select the party and their tokens, but you actually have grabbed a whole bunch of rocks. And that's a huge pain in the ass. So you'll definitely want to consider just putting those elements on the map and background layer to serve as it is described, a background, a backdrop, where you can still freely switch to the map and background and move those things, but primarily you're going to have things that are more static in nature. So before I really jump too more into this, let's actually go back to the page toolbar, and at the top under this current page that we are on, that the players are on as well, I'm going to go to page settings because I want to change some things. It depends on how you want to set your pages up. I primarily, almost everything I do, especially maps that use character tokens that can move squares, and especially if I know it's going to be a place that combat may be happening, I like to have my grid turned on, and I don't do anything fancy. I keep the defaults because that's set up for 5e in mine. You may be playing a different type of tabletop RPG that may require a hex grid or something different, and I went over those details in our last session. You can check that out. But you can also see the options here on the stream that I'm kind of currently looking at. You can change one grid to be anywhere from 5 feet to 20 kilometers or miles. You can set that all up, and when you use a ruler tool over in the toolbar, that'll affect that. You can also switch from square to hex, but for now I'm just going to leave the defaults. You can play with the opacity too. So for just this tutorial, I'm gonna pull this up, and that just basically means you're going to see the actual grid overlay more easily. You can also change the color of the grid if you wanted to. So right now we have it as black, and I have probably like a 60 or 70% opacity against this gray background. So we're just going to leave the gray background for now. A handy tip, you will notice as you play D&D and you gather some maps, whether you create them yourself, but especially if you're going to places and purchasing maps, maybe you grab some from the Roll20 marketplace, maybe you get some from the DM's Guild. I think it is a common factor that you will find that a lot of maps, especially if they're dungeon maps, have a black background. And it may be helpful as you're doing the initial setup of a new page that you go into your page settings and set the background to be black. That way it gives your map a little bit more of a natural feel to it. Instead of seeing that gray background with just a black box and this map piece in it, it actually looks like this is a dark area, almost like a video game, where the character's view outside of this one room would be dark. There would be nothing there. And it just kind of helps immerse things a little bit better. As you notice, I'm using from my marketplace purchases. However, you could definitely scroll down, especially if you're someone who's just playing around in here and you don't necessarily have a ton of maps. You could definitely go into the freebies that they have on here and throw those around. You'll notice my grid is still over top and will stay over top of this map wherever I piece it around. And it just depends on your background. See, like this freebie right here is an island map. Let's actually use that. It's your island map here, or I'll leave this other piece over here because I like that. And, maybe for this, if you're just using like a tropical island thing, maybe you want to use something more akin to like a watery background, like this right here. Something that kind of blends in with your map that helps make it feel a little more naturally placed. If you have access to advanced software like Photoshop and stuff like that, you could even download this map piece or just screenshot this and color sample an area in the water of the map and you can actually, when you're using the backgrounds for these different maps, background color, you can actually edit the hex value, and you could change it to that hex value to make sure it actually looks like that color. So there's a lot of options there. So for now, we're going to actually just change this back to black so it looks a little bit more natural for that left side piece. And moving elements over here, whether it's something from a local folder you have or something that is loaded up over here in the Roll20 art library, is easy enough. It's just a drag and drop, and that's whether they're maps, tokens, etc. So it's very simple, and once you click on it, you'll notice you've selected it. Similar to a lot of different photo editing software, you have the ability to shrink it and make it larger. If you need to edit the actual size and width, you can pull those too. If you need to rotate it, you'll notice this little hanging flange at the top. That's what I'm going to call it. You can grab that and kind of start turning it wherever you desire if you need to flip it somehow. So you could take this here. This completely works with keyboard shortcuts too, so I can Control C to copy and paste, and there's another one right there. And let's just say, hey, there we go. There's my other side of the room. Just slap it down, and there it is. You'll also want to keep in mind as you're placing elements down on your map, the size of them. A lot of the different maps and things that you can get from the Roll20 marketplace at the very least, usually the artists are pretty good about mentioning the grid size of whatever those map pieces are. And you can use that grid size. So for this one here, this person, for Aaron's maps and tiles, the shrines, he didn't actually give us the grid size. And if you have the grid size available, that's actually a really nice tip to have from these creators, because it lets you know using this grid that you see here. And we'll actually change the background so you can actually see the grid a little bit better. Let's go to something like this dark gray here so you can see the full grid. Kind of lets you know how many squares this map is going to take up. So if this particular art piece is altar room 30 by 30, then that's such a great tip to be able to have, because you're like, I know I can slap this down on the page, and I know that if I size it 30 by 30, all the elements are going to work perfectly. Because as you may have noticed, over on the right, our island doesn't really matter. It's a natural island. There is no conformity in terms of the square nature of it, so it doesn't really matter what size it is. And technically, you can use whatever size you want. We could keep these altar rooms the size they are now. But if you've noticed, there is a very symmetrical square shape and defined shape to these maps. And you'll even notice that they have individual tiles in there. This is another great tool, is when creators create rooms with tiles, square tiles specifically, because even though I don't have a specific size from this author, Aaron, to let me know how big this map is, he's given me these beautiful squares, and you know what you can do? You can just keep expanding these squares until one of them takes up the room of a full square on your map. And sometimes that won't work. Sometimes you'll be setting this up and you're like, oh, he didn't actually set this up for these to be aligned with my actual grid map. But that's okay. That's something you can play with. If that happens, you can always use the option to go into these tooltips here, and I'll show you those in just a second when you right click. But for now, there we are. So what I did is I just kept expanding these squares, and you'll notice now that the squares of this room now perfectly match up in sync with the actual grid that I have. And what that means is if I go back over to my toolbar over here, and I go under my layers, and I switch to objects and tokens, and I have glacé size to a square and ringcast size to a square, then now they're going to move beautifully within these squares. Each tile that they step on is going to be a full square that they move. And it's a great tooltip for your players to have too, is these rooms that have squares, because it is a very, unlike our island map over here on the right, it's a very, very easy visual way for your players to tell how far away something is, especially if you're just using, at least for example, our game, and I think a large majority of what people play on here, which is Dungeons and Dragons. It's so simple for Ringkaz to be over here and know that if he is fighting an enemy, let's say that this square where Glacé is an enemy, he knows that that enemy is 5, 10, 15 feet away. He didn't have to use a ruler. He didn't have to guess. He knew just by counting the squares. And it's a nice, easy visual indicator that's very helpful for your players and for you as a dungeon master, because you're not having to constantly sit there and measure things like that. And he's using the ruler currently, which we'll go over. Some other elements as we're talking about this stuff, when we're talking about these types of maps. So let's kind of get this one out of the way. Let's take a look at this one specifically. So If I right click, I have a number of options on this. I am already editing it, so I can't click on that because I currently have it selected, and you can do the same with others. You'll notice that the edit is currently unavailable, and this may be an available option for some things, but as far as I have used this platform, I don't think that's very important. You already have it selected, and this right click option menu already gives you plenty of things to do to edit it. It's easy to delete, but again, keyboard commands are always there. It's almost easier, for me at least, to just click whatever element you have and just hit delete. And similarly, you can just Control Z and bring it back. You want to be careful with that sometimes. It's a little finicky, and you want to be careful. You're trying to delete a token that may have a lot of information, especially a player token that may have a lot of information, their current HP, how many healing surges they have. You may just want to keep an eye out for that, because sometimes you may, between your players moving things and you moving elements or adding elements and deleting things, you may find yourself either too far in the history, or for whatever reason it's a little weird and just doesn't bring that back. So just be careful of things you delete. But if you're right clicking, as usual, you have all of your similar options that you'd have in a lot of these other software programs like Photoshop and Illustrator. You copy, your paste, your undo, your front to back. Now this is layer specific, but at least on the map and background layer, if I put two elements over top one another, I can choose which one of them I want over the other. So for example, I want to add this door double partially open to the map. You'll notice that there it is right there, and let's use our adjusting elements to make it the size that we want. Let's do that right there, and let's shift it up here, and maybe we want to drag it down. So there, perfect. You'll notice it is perfectly over top of these other, and a lot of these maps do that. They have it's almost like Lego pieces, and I'm sure anyone who's played with Legos as a kid would just get a kick out of sitting there and letting your creative drive take over and piece these things together. You'll love how a lot of these nice professional maps that are provided on the Roll20 marketplace or in other places like DM's Guild, Drive Through RPG, there's a lot of resources to take advantage of that offers all kinds of cool tokens, maps, if you create your own. But especially these that have been created for you, have these just wonderful sized to the dimensions of the elements that are in the pack that you get, so that they snap nicely just like this. But sometimes you may be playing around and you may find that all of a sudden I put this down, but the big map is covering it. And the way to do that is to select your map and move it to the back. So not only do we have 4 individual layers just in terms of our playfield, but within each of those, there is sort of a kind of hidden number of layers between things that are over top and under others. So you just want to keep that in mind. If I wanted to have this island somewhere over here and I didn't want it to be over top, making this area look weird, you could put it underneath and just say go to back, and then that makes this piece and all of the other elements pop up in front of it. So just keep that in mind when you're playing around with this stuff here, to be able to use those to your heart's content. You may just like to do this habit. You may have a habit of just like slapping things out onto the play field. And I'm going to want this element, I'm going to want that thing, I'm going to want that thing. And it takes you some time to piece together stuff. So you may naturally notice as you're just building things of like, oh crap, I don't want this underneath this thing. So just keep in mind to be able to use those tools to move things backwards or forwards, so that they're not covering elements that you may want to have be important for your players to see or interact with. Underneath the front or back, you have advanced. And these are pretty self-explanatory. You can select multiple items to group them, ungroup them, so that once they're selected, it grabs everything you have grouped. You have this next option that says is drawing. Now this may have quite a few uses, but the chief one that I am concerned with is when you are using a map that uses a grid. You will notice that as you adjust that element, for example, if I play with this island map, and I tried to move the island map and resize it so that it is this size here, where the right side is ending in between these two squares. When I let go, it's going to automatically snap to a square. That is by default. It's just going to snap to squares so that it hopefully keeps everything consistent. But not all of the elements fit together that well. For example, let's say that you wanted this door to be bigger, but you wanted a very specific size for it. In that case, you can change the values of its size specifically without it snapping to anything by going under Advanced after right-clicking it and going to Is Drawing. Now when I try to edit this double doors and I move it here, it doesn't snap to any squares. And I can do that like this. I can similarly do that if I try to turn and rotate my island map. My island map is going to snap, and it's going to snap in I believe that's 45-degree angles. But sometimes I may just want, maybe I want, let's say that this is, let's go up here and just punch in rock, for example. And as you guys see, I have quite a lot. Let's just throw some rubble in there. You can kind of see the rubble here. Maybe I want to throw the rubble here, and as I'm rotating it, I'm like, I don't want it to just sit at this, like 45-degree angle. So let's right-click, go to Advanced, make it a drawing, and now I can rotate it and adjust its size to the perfect minutia of placement that I want. And you'll notice that works a lot better. Trying to place things outside of having it, especially if you don't need it to snap to the grid. Under Advanced, you have similar options that you can do in terms of flipping things horizontally, flipping them vertically. If you need to mirror something, I could grab this island and I'm like, I love this island, but I kind of want this like spiny tip over on the left side. I want that to kind of be on the right side. You can go under Advanced, flip vertical, and that kind of mirrors the image the opposite way. So there you go. You don't have to download it and throw it into Photoshop or anything. You can have all those elements at your fingertips to be able to do quite a lot of things without needing to bring it outside of the system itself. If you're really wanting to get crunchy with its size, you can go under the set dimensions and you can change from pixels to units, and you can edit exactly how you want it. I prefer to just, based on whatever map I have thrown down, specifically use I set it as a drawing and play with it from there, because I feel like trying to sit there and play with the units of size to get it the exact size, it would just take I'm much more visual in terms of creating things, and that would just take forever for me. But it depends on how you want to do it. You could align things to the grid, and as you do that, this grid alignment tool allows you to quickly size your map background to match the Roll20 grid on the current page. So it's a handy tool to quickly get it sized up. So you basically click and drag to create a box the size of a 3x3 grid, cells on the map of the background you're using. So let's just do that right there, 3x3. And then it says proceed with alignment. Okay, it looks like your grid cells are 70 by 70 pixels. We're going to resize the map so that it matches your page's current grid size, and you say align to grid. And I didn't notice that did a whole lot of much. Let's say align to grid. Click and drag and create a box the size of a 3x3 grid of the cells on the map that you're currently using. So let's do this here. We'll resize the map image. Okay, the map image. So let's just say 5x5. Just play around with this. Align to grid. So there it goes. It's going to resize it for you. And that makes it a whole lot larger. And this island map actually has a lot of detail to it now that you look at it. So that's another way to get really crunchy with it. That's also, if you notice, that's another option I don't really play with. If I need to make something big, I just do so. Something to keep in mind as you're adjusting these elements is if you are trying to make something larger and you grab a square resizing element at the bottom here, you'll notice that you can't actually pull it outside of the play space here, this white space that's outside of your actual map. So an easy way and a quick way, if you're not trying to go through all the crunchy rules, is to just expand it to its maximum size. Let's say you need it larger. You want to move it up into the corner and then continue grabbing to expand it. So that's an option there and there. And now we have a cool ocean background. And as we zoom out here, you'll notice that we don't even have the island on there anymore. That may be a cool way to actually just expand maps and only use certain elements of them. If you're looking to do something like that. Is all this making sense so far, Slim?
It is very similar to I don't know, don't want to say Photoshop, but some similar tools that I've used for other things. I didn't know it could get that in depth. I didn't know I thought a lot of the stuff that you did ahead of time was through Photoshop or just pre-planning, or they were pre-drawn out. I didn't know you could edit as much as you can. It's very beneficial, especially if you're doing different size or different scale for different things. Like the room that you started with, the Egyptian, I guess you could say, style.
Yeah,
the tomb room.
It's like this kind of shrine-ish thing. Yeah.
I could even see that, being, shrunk down or blown up even for a larger scale.
Oh yeah. You don't have to align the square grids that you see on this map with your square map. You can make them double that size and make it this grand place. You may want to keep an eye on if the author of this map has placed certain items around, because you may find that although this now looks like a big giant room, you may find that all of a sudden a little fork that they placed on one of the tables now looks as big as a spear for one of the characters. So you'll want to keep an eye on those elements. But yeah, absolutely, you don't have to follow the structure of keeping everything the same size as whatever you're trying to align it to. Even if the author says, hey, this is meant as a 30 by 30 thing, make it whatever size you want. Like I said, this island map right here, we just blew it up and now it's just the ocean behind us. There's no longer even an island.
See, now I'm taking game notes. Giant spoon and or fork to slay dragon.
Maybe you want your players to come across a spear that looks just like a giant fork. Yeah, that is certainly an option. Moving on from the map and background, that really goes over the tall and short of that. You'll also notice that as you are editing things on your map and background, if you have elements that are on the objects and tokens layer or the GM info layer, that they kind of gray out. And that's basically, you'll notice there's some transparency, not gray out, there's some transparency to these two tokens. And they basically do that to just show, hey, this is on a different layer and you're not going to be able to edit that. This doesn't happen the same way with the map and background when you're looking at it from a different layer. So just kind of keep that in mind. Whenever you're like, how come, sometimes you'll be on your map and you're like, why does Rinkaz look like he's see-through, he's a ghost? It's because you're on, more than likely, the map and background or GM info layer. So moving on to the objects and tokens layer. This is going to be your prime place. This is where a lot of GMs, at least for me specifically, you're going to be spending the majority of your time, because you're going to be moving tokens around. I would say maybe at least a 60-40. You're going to be 60% on objects and tokens and 40% on the GM info layer. And, a decent portion on the map and background, but not as much. Hopefully that's more static than anything else. But on objects and tokens, this is where the players are. This is the layer that they're on. So as your players are moving their tokens and shifting around in the game, you will basically, they'll be able to move those elements that they have control of, but they won't be able to move anything that's on the map and background or anything that's on the GM info layer or dynamic lighting, but we'll get there. They have access to this layer, and so do you. So similarly, as you put elements on the objects and tokens layer, they're going to be able to see that. And you can move them around. This is where you'll be putting a lot of goblin tokens when they have a fight with some goblins, or, maybe you have an area on your map, like a doorway, that you want to put on here. Let's take this doorway, for example, that we had over here. Maybe you're using this, but you actually want it to be something that the players can break apart and push through. Well, the way that you can kind of set that up is you can put it on the token layer, and you can do all that by right-clicking it. Instead of having to copy Control X to delete it and then move to another layer to paste it, if you right-click any element at the very bottom of our options, we have layer, and that easily lets you shift from one to the other. So I just took our open doorway over here, and moved it to our token layer. So now we have Glacé, and she wants to bash through these doors instead of having to go to the map and background layer, delete it, and then go back to the objects and tokens layer. We have this already on the same layer that she's on, that you're likely already on, and you can just select it and delete it. She can't do that if she doesn't have permissions to it, which most players should only have permissions to things like their character tokens, their familiars, their allies, maybe their followers or companions, stuff like that. But largely they shouldn't be able to access some of those other things, and that gives you free reign to pick those objects and elements and be able to move them around, delete them, add them in, etc. That's the objects and tokens layer. And last session, did we go over the actual token options?
I don't think we did, which is something I was going to ask about. That was one question that I thought we were going to get to today, now that I think of it. Because these originally, I remember we had gone over when we first set up, and I think there's a lot of potential for these for, heck, even other things. I know they're beneficial for us in game. They help us keep track of quite a...
What was your question in regard to that?
Just for editing them and what, like creating like the auras and stuff, like the process to adding them to your character or modifying others. Because I've seen you make, black and white clones of us, if it was like a mirrored image, or if it was in our game, in VD, when he makes his giant golden boy version of himself.
Mm-hmm. So that's pretty simple. Let's say you as a DM want to add your player tokens to the map, or maybe it's a NPC or creature or monster that you're adding to the map. But let's just start with your player tokens. Your players, if they create them, have them created, or maybe you help to create some tokens for them and you set them on the map, and it doesn't matter whether they are the circular type with a frame or the sort of top-down view that you see with a lot of the free assets that is offered in the Roll20 stuff. Doesn't matter, they all work the same. They're all going to work in a similar way that I've shown you in terms of resizing and editing with all the tools that you have at your fingertips. Let's take Ringkaz's token here, and let's take a look at the options. Now, before I go into edit tokens, I just want to click on it, and you guys have probably noticed that 3 bubbles pop up at the top and then 2 at the bottom. This is essentially 3 different values that you can enter for your character. As I mentioned before, Roll20 as a system is almost by default set up for Dungeons & Dragons. And in that similar vein, they have these 3 bubbles. And that essentially is for the character's hit points, the character's inspiration if they have it, and their healing surges. At least that's what I've come to know them as. And if you just want to edit on the fly and you're not worried about double clicking and getting into the nitty gritty of the token, you could just click on any one of these bubbles and just immediately add one of those in there. So there's 5, and you'll notice it'll disappear, but as we click there, it pops up. And there's 5 there. And you'll notice that you can add modifications and stuff like that with the tool thing that pops up. These can be anything you want. You don't have to follow the strict, regimen of hit points, healing surges, stuff like that. They can be whatever. As a matter of fact, you can color them to whatever you want, as far as I know. And let's see here.
I didn't know you could change the color on them.
Maybe you can't, actually. I may be wrong about that. But you can choose the elements that they are linked under too. But let's dive in. Like I said, I'm not the end all be all when it comes to knowing this. But just because, even if they are just your red, green, blue, they can be anything you want. I think by default, when you use assets from the Roll20 marketplace and you place a token that's like from a module down or an add-on, it uses the green area as a hit point. I don't like that. I don't use that. Red to me is hit points. That's the blood flowing through your veins. So I always switch it once I place a token down. But it can be whatever you want. If you're not even playing in, D&D, the blue could be your cyber points in a cyber campaign while you're cyber sexing other characters. Doesn't matter. Use it for whatever you want. At the bottom here, you will notice 2 other icons. the one at the bottom that has this almost little circle or eye will give you some options for some different little icons that you can put on the character. You can easily put a number of them by just clicking on them. And you'll notice you can use more than one, and they get highlighted as you do so. And basically this is a great way for you keeping track of things that happen to a player. If Rinkaz gets hit by a slow spell, I could put a snail on him to remind me, oh, he's slow. And this could be helpful for the player as well. If he takes a lot of damage and finds himself below half health, we're not playing in 4th edition where you're bloodied anymore, but it may be a good idea, and your players can add these things to themselves as well to maybe kind of almost have a visual cue to the other players to look over and see as they're mid-battle that Rinkaz has put the red dot on his character to kind of signify that maybe he's below half health. Maybe the characters are engaged in battle, and as they look over, your players will see the red dot on the icon. And in immersion world, in the theater of the mind, that's the players looking at Rinkaz and seeing that he's taken some damage. He's got a number of bruises and nicks across his body. He's bleeding from certain areas where a number of swords have slashed into him, and they can kind of bring that up from there. You can use these icons for whatever you want. They can stand for whatever you want. And I believe if you go under your profile, you can actually add your own. I believe that's one of the newer features. You have the availability to add your own custom icons if you want. I have not done that. I think the plethora offered here is easy enough to be able to find something that suits the need for whatever's happening in the game. And the X or dead is pretty simple enough. You'll notice each of these icons have a name to them as you mouse over. We use the X mark to show that a character has just died. And like I said, you can use multiple ones. Let's take these off. Finally, this settings corkscrew here or gear will, similarly as you would double clicking on it, take you over to this area where you can see the edit tokens and be able to get an eye on some more details about Rinkaz. You'll notice because we punched in the 5 value in the green bar, which is technically considered the first bar under the edit token details, that it's already added in that 5 value. So a couple of different things. When we're first doing this, as we add something new to the table, when you just throw a token in there, one of the first things under these 3 tabs, which is basic, advanced, and dynamic lighting, we're going to stay under basic. The first thing you're going to see is represents character. If you are adding different character tokens into your game and you want them to represent your players and you want your players to be able to have control of them and similar things, this is where you're going to assign that. And under the question mark tooltip, you'll notice that it says you can choose to have the token represent a character from the journal, which you can set up. So if we have Rinkaz set up under the journal, let's say we have him as a character. We created this character and we went into our files to upload his picture, and we're just going to change this to Rinkaz. There we go. We're going to save that. If you added a picture, he would be there, but right now, instead of adding a handout, we just added a character. And I like to do that. Most of my players use D&D Beyond as a resource to build their character sheets, but this is a nice way to maybe have a little area that they can, play with. You can always allow them to edit to. Under Edit Rinkaz, you can let him control that. So if I do this and save it, now he will see that in his journal under this campaign, and he'll be able to edit the info that's under there. But now that that's added in, I can say, okay, I have Rinkaz as a character in here, and I've added a picture. He's gone in because I gave him access to it, and he's added a little backstory. So now when he comes in here, he can always double click on this. And, if you want, you can build your character sheet in here. You'll notice this is a Call of Cthulhu character sheet because this is just a campaign set up for that originally. But this would be a D&D sheet if we had this under those pretenses in the options for this particular game. And you can add in the attributes and stuff for some of the macro stuff we talked about. Bio and info, this could be the place that Slim or Brian puts in his notes for Rinkaz, some background. But now that I have that set in there, we can go under represents character for his character token. I'm going to pick Rinkaz. And it's going to automatically let him be able to control Rinkaz, that character. because under the Rinkaz character, you gave Rinkaz or whatever player access to that token. So it just kind of builds it in. Now, if you don't want to do that, and you just want to leave it as a non-generic token, and you don't want to get too much interspersed with that, and I think if you fill out your character sheet and stuff like that too, it may actually add in the HP and stuff, which is kind of a cool feature. I haven't done that myself, full admittance, and none of my players have, because again, we use D&D Beyond. But that's an option that you could do, and it may plug in some things, attributes from that character sheet. That's actually pretty cool. But let's just leave it as a non-generic token. You can leave it as this, and you can still give your players access to it. So the name of this token is Rinkaz. And if you want to show the nameplate, currently you'll notice here's Rinkaz, a yellowish, tan, orangish lizard man. He's Rinkaz, but you don't see his nameplate. If I click Show Nameplate and I say those changes, I now see his name displayed underneath. Now, that displays it to the DM. That's not seen by the players. That's something that you're going to want to turn on over on the Advanced tab, but we'll get to that. So there's Rinkaz. Sometimes this is very handy. For example, like when you have a number of monsters on the map and you're looking, you have access to their stats and their stat block. It's very nice to be able to have the nameplates on here where we have them ticked, but only you as a DM get to see them, because your players aren't going to automatically know what the monsters are they're running into are named or what they are. But for you as a DM, it's an easy way for you to be like, okay, that's a ghoul, and so I immediately know that I can look at the ghoul stats instead of kind of squinting at your tokens and being like, I think that's a ghoul, or maybe is that a zombie? It's just an easy way for you to quickly identify your tokens out there without having to show it off to the players, unless you want to show off the nameplate, which you can do in advance, and we'll go over that. Controlled by, similarly, you can give control to everyone, meaning that everyone has access to edit the details in here for this character token and move them around and things like that. Or I could just specifically give it to Rinkaz. So Slim, who is logged in under that, will be able to move Rinkaz around now. Underneath the edit token, you'll notice the tint color, and this just basically creates an overlay, and this can do this for anything. These options are also available for any item, not just character tokens. For example, these rocks over here, let's go back to the map and background layer. If I double click, I have the same exact list of options. Now, I don't want to add HP for rocks because who cares? But let's say I want to make these a more jungly color of rock, and so you can add your green tint, and there they have a little bit of a greenish tint to them. And similarly with Rinkaz, let's say he's super sick and I don't want to use an icon. Well, maybe you could use like a yellow overlay in there. He's not feeling so good. This is handy, and this is something that Slim, you were just pointing out. And if you ever want to, at the bottom right, you'll notice this transparent hex that takes the color off. Glosse, for example, is a bard, and she has a lot of spells, and you'll find that a lot of times she is using them to cast things like dancing lights, for example. And when she does that, instead of trying to hunt in my art library for stuff, I'm like, you know what? I have an easy option for this. I'm going to select her token. I'm going to Control-C, Control-V to make a copy of it. I'm going to double-click it. That way we know, because it's her icon, that she's the one who's casted dancing lights. And yes, it looks like her, but we're going to say that this is one of her dancing lights. And I'm just going to copy her character token and give it a light pink tint to it. And there you are. There's your dancing lights that are shifting around. You can use more natural looking effects like some magic stuff from your art library or create art assets. But that's a quick and dirty way to just create, like, okay, here's this magical light created by you, Glosse, and you can tell because it is you, just with a tint to it to denote that it is this dancing mote of light in the air that moves around. And similarly, if you do that too, and you copy, Rinkaz, for example, let's say Rinkaz for whatever reason gets access to the magic spell to do that, I can make this token similarly a pink. And now, because you just made a copy of the Rinkaz token, which he already has control of, let's say right there and save that. When you make a copy of that, he's going to have control over that copy too. So that is a very easy way to make a quick little piece on the fly. It's a dancing light. It doesn't break immersion too bad. It's easily identified as whose spell it is, which would be yours, Rinkaz. And because you made a copy of a token you already have control over, you can move the dancing lights yourself. So it's a quick and easy and dirty way of doing things like that, especially if you have players who are able to cast a lot of magic. So if you are looking in here, you can move both of those icons, right, Rinkaz?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like you can move dancing lights around. Let's see. Aha!
Which is really cool. I didn't know that's was that easy. You said Control C, Control V, just copy and paste. Like,
Yep. And you can always right click and similarly do that, of course. But I just like to use keyboard shortcuts.
no, I think that's a good idea. That's
But yeah, it copies all of the properties that are already set for that token. So I know, for example, if I make a copy of Rinkaz's token, he's still going to have control over whatever that copy is. So I'm just going to slap down a copy of his token, paint it pink, Theater of the Mind, we're going to say it's a glowing moat, and it's a quick way that he has access over it immediately.
man, I wish I had this back in the 3rd edition days. I used to play a modified version of basically a Blood Elf Rogue, and I had 2 levels of Wizard going Arcane Trickster, and I used to just cast Mirror Image all the time. That was I just go into combat, do that, and it was basically playing Naruto all the time because I always had a chance to, 50, 75, or 25% chance of not getting blasted. I'm just running up at the biggest, nastiest things, and I'm like, nope, we'll see how this works. And we always had to try to make tokens, and he's like, we'll just roll a dice to be fair.
Yeah, it is super helpful for things like that, absolutely. That goes over the stuff on the left side, stuff on the right side. You have your bars. Now, if you have when you select a character from your journal as the represents character option for a token, that does a number of things, as I mentioned, of plugging things in. For example, you can easily, and this is something I do because my players don't use Roll20 to build their characters out. They don't use the sheets in there. They use D&D Beyond. But if your players did, you can easily just edit these on the fly. 25 out of 25, let's see, he's a lower level. There's his health right there. And as you punch that in, you'll notice the bar appear over his head. And if he takes damage, you can just say there, 23. Or similarly, you can just say on the fly, click the bubble above him and set it to 11 instead of having to double click his token, go into the options here and do that. But if you have it representing his character in the journal, you'll have a number of options over here to the right. And you'll notice they look strange. They have all these words with an underscore and something else. So if we go over the question mark tooltip, you'll notice that you can choose an attribute from your character profile that this token represents. The values for this bar will be synced to the values of that attribute. So for example, I am sure that underneath here, if we click this drop down and keep scrolling down, that there's probably someone here that's for hit points, HP. And if Slim had built his character sheet within the Roll20 system, whatever value he had set for his hit points would automatically automate and fill in these areas. That's a really cool thing to have. I don't know that there's a huge audience of people that specifically build their character sheets in Roll20, and it's easy enough to edit these values without having to have that plugged in, but it's certainly a really nice thing to have, especially if your players don't mind making a copy of their sheet and building it out in Roll20, because it just is such an easy way of accessing that and having that already built in so you don't have to keep managing it here and there. But it's easy enough to do so. So you can edit these values. We can say this is 2x2, this is 4x4. And again, all of these you'll notice once you input the values, they're going to pop up as bars above Rinkaz's head. And if you leave them blank, no bars are going to appear. So if we say that, you'll see these bars now. And let's just punch in. Let's actually, because this is kind of screwing this up because we don't have a character sheet for him. Let's go back to none under the drop down. Let's just do 11 out of 25. So there's his 3 bars above here. And we'll talk about those in a second in terms of making those a little bit more manageable, because as you'll notice, it's very helpful. But if you're on a map, especially with a lot of other players, you'll notice that sometimes these bars can fill up a lot of space. Especially if Rink has, similar to, as I mentioned, each one of these 4 layers also has other hidden layers on it. So Rink has, with all of his bars, if he's actually a token that's set to the front and he's underneath Glacé, those bars are going to practically cover her completely up. Now it's easy enough to just set him to the back so that you're not interposing over important elements or character tokens, but there's also a way to make these more compact or to just make them invisible. I like for them to be visible personally for other players so that they can get a general idea, like a visual representation of what's going on with that player, but I like them in a compact fashion, but we'll go over that in a second. So this is the non-compact, just 3 big bars with the full numbers there for everyone to be able to see. You'll notice underneath their auras, there are certain characters, certain monsters, especially if you're a GM, that can radiate certain auras or have area of effects. Maybe Rink has drinked a vile flame potion and it's given him some really fiery gas. So you can check mark to make this square or leave it to just have it be a circle. And from there you'll notice that you can input a value that stands as feet and give it a color. So let's just leave it this yellow, or actually let's make it this like a noxious green, and let's just say that he has some bad gas that goes out to 10 feet in terms of a radius. Well, there. Now we have a radius of 10 feet of gas. Now again, this isn't actually going to be something that the players automatically see. Like I think right now, Rinkaz, you don't see that green aura around you, do you?
On the screen I do.
Oh, you do? Okay, cool. Let's see. Okay, so that is on the advanced tab, which we'll go over in just a second. Not everyone, you'll want to make sure that you have the values set over in the advanced tab, because you as a DM get to see all of this because you're the one who's behind the screen. But that doesn't, you being able to see these elements doesn't mean your players are. And you have a plethora of ways to be able to show and tell to your players. You just need to make sure that you have those options set. So you can have 2 different auras for each character token. And so we're just going to leave that as we're going to leave Rinkaz currently with a stinky aura around him just so that we can play around with the options on the advanced tab. Finally, underneath that, if you are the GM/DM of the campaign, you have GM notes, and those are things you can put in here to keep in mind about this particular character token. Or again, this could be for any element. I could put notes about reveal Rinkaz's secret history backstory when he enters this room as something to remind me. Or similarly, I could go back to the map and background, select our jungle rocks and just say make rocks fall when players walk underneath them, or something similar to that. You can put notes wherever you want, and only you will see those notes, so keep that in mind. And of course, you have plenty of formatting options there. But moving on to the advanced tab, player permissions. This is what I just mentioned. You can see everything because you are God, but your players only see what you allow them to see. And that's both good and bad. Mostly good. You want them to only have the information that will be available to them without breaking the game too much. You want it to be immersive. So immediately under player permissions, this is what I was talking about before. If you checkmark this area under the token or element's name that says show nameplate, you will see Rinkaz. But anybody else that doesn't have control of that token won't. So under player permissions, under name, you'll see that there's 2 different ones here, see and edit. And this pretty much goes down the board here. At the bottom, you'll see some text that helps outline it. If you check mark the C option, all players will view. So if I set this to C right now for his name, anybody will see Rinkaz underneath his token. So now this is what I do in Weird and Wild. I already have the name of that character entered on the token, and for me as a DM, I have a check mark to show the nameplate so I don't forget who that is because I have a terrible memory. And let's say this is a character that is first being introduced to the players, but maybe it's a character that I'm going to bring back further. I will be able to see their nameplate, but they won't. So they just see this token, this person or this creature, and they don't know what their name is because why would they? They just met this thing. But as they get to know them, once they, for example, introduce themselves and say, hey, I'm Bob, I will then actually go into the edit token menu under advanced, and now I'll click the C button. So now it's like, okay, he just introduced himself or you learned his name, and now everyone gets to see that name so they too can remember who this is. Similarly, if you checkmark the edit option, the controlling players can view and change. So for all of these elements, because this token represents Rinkaz, he can see all of his 3 bars, he can see the auras around him. Other players, unless you hit this C checkmark box, won't. Right now, the only thing they'd be able to see is his name, because that's the only thing clicked here. So here is your, under player permissions, underneath name, bar 1, 2, 3. That's these 3 bars here that has different values for hit points or whatever you want to make them stand for. And we can certainly hit see all. And the text overlay, not only can you show them to your players, but you also have the further ability to be like, okay, I want to show the bars to everybody, but I only want Rinkaz to be able to see the actual number values. I can just set it to visible to editors, which is the default. Or if you're playing, for whatever reason, a stranger, one that you may not, maybe it's a super immersive TTRPG where you don't even want the players to know how much help they have. Like in real life, you don't have 45 over 45 over your head and you trip over a rock and smash your head. It's not like you see -3 points flow over your head. You have no idea. So maybe you're playing in a campaign where it's more amorphous or ambiguous what their hit points are. You can just go hidden. So now no one can see, even the person controlling that token. Or you can just do visible to everyone, and everyone's going to see those values. I like to leave the bars, personally, I like to leave the bars up for everyone, but I like to leave the numbers for the players themselves. And going either further than that, I actually don't like these big bars, so I do take an extra step as we go below that. So those are those options. Bar location, this is where the bars are going to display, and this is pretty, you can look at the question mark tooltip, this is pretty self-explanatory. You can put them above, you can put them over top where it's overlapping the character token, so it kind of, it takes up a little less room above them, it kind of covers the token a little bit, and that gets a little obnoxious, especially if you have a lot of bars that are this big. See, like at the bottom, that's like half of his token, which may work for you if you're in a real crunchy campaign with a lot of combat or numbers flying by. Maybe you don't care if those cover those things, but just something to keep in mind. I just keep mine at top by default, so I'm just going to set these above. Underneath that, underneath the bar location, you have the bar style, and this is one of my more favorite abilities here. Is you have the standard option, which is the default, which is full-size token bars and displays the text overlays, or you get the compact version, which is narrow token bars and no text overlay. And I like to use compact. So if we say that, you'll notice this is how I like to display it to everyone. Rinkaz, who's controlling this token, can see these bars above his head, and he has, although he can't see the numbers, he can easily either click on his character token and see them at a quick glance, or double click to see their values under the basic tab. But everyone else similarly can see these 3 bars, but they don't take up a whole lot of room, and as I mentioned before, I kind of like a little immersion. Obviously my players are free to, out of character, say, hey, I'm kind of hurting over here, I've got 13 out of 45 hit points left. But I almost like to leave that as a visual indicator too, so I like to let other players see those bars, but you can't see the numbers. So that's an easy way for them to easily notice as, Rinkaz gets shot by let's actually turn this red bar into his HP bar, and let's just turn the others off. Let's just have it be this red one. Maybe you only want to display hit points. But let's say he's down to 5 points out of 25. He's been hit by a big beam from some type of cannon or sword. Everyone else, although they can't see what exactly that value is, they'll be able to see that bar, if you have it shown to them, is pretty low. And that's a visual way for them to be like, hey, I don't know how much HP Slim's Rinkaz character has, but it looks like he's hurting. And then they can bring that up and almost maybe like a role play fashion, and to say, hey, how badly hurt is Rinkaz? You know, and he can say, oh, I've got cuts and bruises, or Slim could just say, yeah, I've got 5 hit points left. But I like to leave it as compact because it takes up less room. It adds a little bit of immersion to the combat and playing with the characters so that they can still see each other and how they're doing, but they don't have an exact value. But I don't care if they table talk to, that's fine. Similarly, underneath the bar style, you have both auras. So if I want everyone to see Rinkaz's flatulence aura, there I made it viewable to everyone. Moving on from there is the options for emitting light, but we're going to save that as well as the third dynamic lighting tab for when we actually get there. So those are a large portion of the options, and again, that's not just for character tokens, that's for anything. I could edit those same values for this map over here. I could give the map a name. I could put GM notes for this big chapel map. You know, whatever you need to do it for. But that is where a large portion of your interest is going to be taken. Not only, especially if you're a player, you're almost restricted to that area, but even as a DM, you're going to be spending a large portion of your time specifically playing on this area over here in terms of the layer that has the objects and tokens. So get used to that. Click into these tokens, play with these options. There's plenty of, as you saw, even when we went in to edit these elements, they have plenty of tooltips for you, text that lets you know what these things are. So if you get lost or forget, because there's a lot of things going on here, it's easy enough to remember. If all else fails, play with it. Plug in some numbers, see what it changes. And it's pretty quick to pick up and figure out what does what. After the objects and tokens layer, we get to put on our GM/DM hood and laugh maniacally because we're shifting over to the GM info layer. This is a layer like any other. You can similarly place down tokens to your heart's content, and they will slap down. As you slap them down, you'll notice that even though you're on the GM info layer, that they have a certain transparency to them. And that's just basically telling you that anything that you put on the GM layer, you as the GM are going to be able to see, although with a little transparency, just to notify you, but no one else can.
Oh, now see, that's handy. That, especially stealth groups or designing what's going to happen later. That's very beneficial.
Oh
like
yeah.
That thing.
Yeah. I was trying to see if I can find this right here. We use this a little bit on Weird and Wild. Here, as I slapped it down, I actually put it in the GM layer, but I want it to be on the map layer, so it's easy enough to right-click, go down to layer, and slap it on the map layer. Let's turn Rinkaz's flatulence aura off so that we have a little bit of view. So let's go to my map and background layer, make this a big hole. There's a big ass hole right there, and I want a dragon to pop out of it, but I don't want them to see that there's a dragon there. But I want the dragon to be ready and sized, and maybe I have some stats for it. You know, maybe it's got all the values plugged in, and I don't want to have to sit there and do that when the dragon pops out. So I have it ready. This is where you put it on the GM layer. You can see it, you know it's there, but your players don't. So as Rinkaz is walking across, so you make him do a perception check or you role play it out. He hears some rumbling in the hole, and then you go to your GM info layer, you right click your dragon, go to layer and put him on the token layer, and then everyone playing sees this dragon pop up out of this hole and is terrified or is suicidal and laughs crazy as they fire off their guns and match to try and kill it. This is a great way to sneak monsters on the map in corners where you don't want your players to see them yet, or elements that you don't want your players to see just yet. This is a great way to, if you have familiars and stuff, that maybe one of your warlock's familiars got blown up, but you know he's probably going to summon it back at some point, you can just leave it on the map, just leave it on the GM layer, and when he's ready to summon it, just bring it back to the token layer, or the object and tokens layer. So it's a great way to have things there sort of in behind the screen placed on the map, but only you as the dungeon master can see it. That's where I keep all my secrets, Slim.
I like it.
And similarly, if we go up to our page settings and we scroll down, there may be an option to actually change the variance in terms of how dark things are on the GM layer. There may not be, actually. Oh, here we go. You'll notice as you mouse over your layers and you see your 4, down at the bottom you have your GM overlay opacity. So as you're putting things, so let's say this dragon's hiding in his hole, you right click on the layer, send it back to GM layer. Maybe you want that to be less apparent, like he's such a big token we can barely see the hole behind him, and your players don't care, they just see the hole. But you as the GM, you're like, I can't even really tell, I forgot what was even behind him. You just drop this down some, and it adjusts on the fly. Or maybe you want them to be more apparent. You're like, I've got a very busy map background and I don't want it to get lost, so I want there to be some opacity so that I know that he's on the GM layer, but not much. So you can edit that on the fly to whatever your heart's content is. Moving on from there, we have dynamic lighting. Dynamic lighting is a big one. It is more on the what I would consider advanced side of things. So let's set this up. We're going to adjust this map. We're going to delete these little things here. We're going to adjust this map so that it fits again within this grid that we have set up. And I'm going to, you'll notice that it's actually not snapping. And sometimes you're like, wait, why isn't it snapping? It's because we have it set as a drawing. So let's turn that off. And now as we move it around, you'll notice that it snaps back to the grid that it's on. So let's align it with the grid. And again, there's multiple ways to do this. Sometimes they have it mentioned under the art library how big it is. Sometimes you can match it up to the squares. Sometimes you don't have either though. Sometimes you kind of just have to size it and you're like, yeah, you know, that looks appropriate to what the player scale should be. You know, if there's, like I mentioned, those elements, like if you have a dining room scene and you're not really sure how big this map is supposed to be, just look at the utensils around. Look at the plates and stuff like that and kind of just size it to what makes sense to the players. So for this one, we're very lucky because we have perfectly square tiles that I can line up with our square grid here. So we've done that. Now, I want to add dynamic lighting to this map. Specifically this room, because we're just going to do this room, we're going to make it simple. Dynamic lighting is the ability for your tokens to only see what their sight would allow them to see. Meaning that if you have a token that moves around the corner away from the token Rinkaz is controlling, he doesn't automatically know what's around that corner. He can only see what his token sees. And this is a perfect way to build atmosphere and build dungeons and make things more immersive, where your characters wouldn't necessarily have God sight and see the entire map. Now there is obviously another option to do that, which is hiding areas, but we're just going to kind of go over some of the dynamic lighting options. Now, the dynamic lighting layer is a layer only you get to see, and you're not going to really be placing any art elements on here. You're going to be drawing shapes, because those shapes are going to outline your walls. And your walls or other pieces that are going to, your columns or whatever, are going to be objects that your players can't see through. So instead of adding tokens or anything like that, we're going to be drawing different shapes. And for me specifically, depending on what map I work on, I like to just use a line tool. That tool, as you notice as we're looking at our 4 different layers here, is underneath the layers in our toolbar, underneath these 3 connected dots. That gives us a couple options. We can draw a shape, and that gives us the ability to draw a rectangle. We can hold Alt to make a circle or ellipse, and Shift to snap it to a grid. So we can just draw those shapes. It doesn't even have to be for anything in particular. Maybe you're just doing a map on the fly, and your characters come across a lake. You know, let's go to the map and background, and they're like, we come across a lake, and you're like, oh shit, I don't have a lake. So you can click Draw Shape. Over here, you have the outline color and then the fill color. So let's set, I want to draw a quick lake. I'm going to set the outline color to nothing, transparency, and the fill color to be this. And we're going to actually change this to regular. And we're going to make sure and hold Alt to make it a circle. So let's hold Alt. And there we are. There's your lake, guys, that you come across. That's quick and dirty lake right there. But those are easy things to add. All of these tools, similar with a free hand, you can be like, you guys see this over here, and you'll notice that filled because I actually have it set to fill. So let's actually switch over and make this like this so that the blue is the outline instead of the fill. Now I can just draw. Maybe you're an old school DM and you don't have a ton of access to resources like these maps, or maybe you're strapped for cash and you don't have the money or access to be able to get some of these maps. Maybe you're old school and you just like to draw. You could easily make the background of this page white and just grab some different elements and be like, you know what, let's make this like a green, and there that you're in a jungle and here's some bushes. You can do that. It has all the fun of basic things that would be built into something like paint.
The world where Bob Ross could be our GM would be the best world.
Yeah. So you can draw shapes. You can do freehand, which is what I just did. You can do a polygon or a line. So you can actually click, and that starts a point. And whenever you click again, it draws a line to it, draws a line to it, draws a line to it. Similarly, I can hold shift, and it's going to snap it to a grid. So if I want perfect grid lines, you see those showing up, Slim?
I do.
So I can draw just like that. You can do text. I can say in, and there we have an in area over here. Similarly, as you notice, again, this depends on what layer are we on. I could go to the GM layer and I could use text and I could type, this is where the dragon appears and eats the players. And that's text that only I see because it's on the GM layer. This is a really helpful tool if you're building a map or dungeon and you want certain things to happen. Maybe you're running with a module. Even if you're running with a published module, it's still a really great way to add quick little notes that you can remember.
Alluding notes I can think of already because there's so many. Thinking back to the first module they made for 5e, the Horde of the Dragon Queen, coming up shortly, I'm trying to run one part, and there's literally 3 or 4 different mapping areas that could be a little more in depth, and each one of these rooms has potential for treasure or nothing, and some of it's super specific. And I don't have those maps handy. I could make something close to it, but making those GM layer notes would be very beneficial because one of the rooms has a lot of treasure, and I was trying to remember what is in there. You walk into the room and it's there. That's I feel that's cheating.
And similarly with this text, you can change the colors, the size. You have all of these options at your fingertips. Like I said, a lot of this is self-explanatory. A lot of it is very intuitive. It's not difficult to figure out. It's not difficult to wrap your mind around. And if you do forget, it's easy enough to play around with things to figure it out. If you're like, I just need to get rid of all these drawings. Similarly, especially because I've learned this in my own campaign, players have access to the ability to draw these things. So they have drawn plenty of stuff on my maps. And if you have nuisance players, or if you're just trying to clear a map out of the things you've drawn, like I said, maybe you're that old school player and you just drew this quick on the fly city and they're leaving it now, you just hit clear and that'll get rid of the drawings that you have. Here, let me see. And I think that's specific to the layers. Let's go to the background layer and clear drawings on here. There we go. So those are all gone now. So let's go back. So the reason I kind of switched from dynamic lighting to these shape and drawing options is because you're going to go back to your dynamic lighting layer and you're going to create the objects that the players can't see through by using those tools that you draw with. So on your dynamic lighting layer, I like to, after we are on that layer, go down to the polygon and line tool. And for me, I like to just choose an outline color. We don't want something to fill, because if you draw a box, you're not going to see anything in that box but whatever color you have selected. You just want to be able to see the outline of the walls. For me, I like to choose, this is specific to me, you can choose whatever you want. I want something stark that stands out. Again, only you are going to see this. So I want that neon green. Now let's look at this shrine area. I want to draw a area around this shrine that serves as the walls, so that when the players are standing inside, they can't see past the walls here. So I'm going to do that by, you can obviously click anywhere using this line tool and it's going to create this. Or you can similarly, let's go ahead and clear drawings. I like to hold down Shift, as I mentioned before, and you'll see those tooltips pop up when you mouse over the polygon/line tool. You can hold Shift and it will snap to the grid. So I'm going to put my mouse cursor over the bottom left corner of this shrine map, and I'm going to hold down Shift so that it creates a point there, and each place that I click, I'm going to hold down Shift so it snaps perfectly to this grid. And although the hallway at the bottom here ends, I'm actually going to draw it out just a little bit further and make it go around a corner, just so that I can show you how the effect works. So you'll notice here I'm just clicking in the center of the wall, and basically this is going to be the area that serves as the place that your player's vision cuts off at. And this doesn't have to be a wall. If you have columns in an area, you could similarly draw those circles, those ellipses, or something like that. And you could draw, any element that you add on here is going to be an object that interferes with that character's vision. So for now, I'm just going to do walls. And Slim, are you watching the stream where you can see me drawing this green outline?
Mm-hmm.
You'll notice that I've drawn it all around, and I finally want to connect the pieces. And you'll notice that when I connect these last two pieces here, when I do that, it shifts from on top of the grid to beneath that. That is actually a signifying way to show you that it's kind of closed. It's a nice little quick hint that you have closed things off. You want to make sure as you're building things, especially if you're not snapping things to a grid and you're just using the line tool by itself, that you want to make sure and close things off. Because if I didn't close this corner off, then players will be able to see through that crack, and you don't want that. Similarly, while you are on the dynamic lighting page, now that I've drawn this shape that makes the walls of the temple, like anything else on any other types of layers, I can move that around if I wanted. Control Z to move it back. We're just going to leave it where it is. So I've moved it there. And let's say that at the bottom of this map, at the center where it seems to trail off down south, I want there to be a door there. So I'm going to go back to dynamic lighting. I'm going to go to my polygon line tool. Now you can definitely place down a token that serves as a door. That's helpful. But you also want to add a line that kind of covers that door so your players can't see past it. And I like to change the color up so that I know what is a door and what is something else, like the walls. I like my walls to be a bright green. I like my doors to be a bright red. So I pick the door. I'm actually going to draw it a little bit out from one side to the other. And it doesn't matter because only you're going to see it. But now, as Rinkaz stands inside here, and I'm going to show you what that looks like from his vision. As he stands here, he's going to not be able to see past the green, and now he won't be able to see past the red. Now the reason I did that as a different color and separate shape is because if the players, for whatever reason, push past that area, I want them to be able to see it. I want them to be able to see outside of that area. So what I would do is, using my select, I would grab that element and delete it, and he'd be able to see past it. So for now, we're gonna leave that on the layer that it is, and we're gonna go back to dynamic lighting. And once you go to any of your map, token, or object, or GM layer, your dynamic lighting shapes are gonna disappear. They're only viewable when you're on dynamic lighting. So don't worry, you're not going to have this kaleidoscope of colors everywhere if you create a map with dynamic lighting. They'll only show up when they're on that layer. So I have simply created this room. I have blocked out everything I wanted to block out. Let's test and see how it works. Let's grab Rinkaz's token and slap it in here. Once it's in here, as you guys saw before, we're going to double click his token. And there's two ways to go about this, and you have to choose one because you can't have both active at the same time. Roll20 has added in a new form of dynamic lighting. The second tab, the Advanced tab, the options on the right are the Legacy version. These are the old ways that they have to control lighting. Similarly, on the third tab, you have the various options that serve as the functions of dynamic lighting and their updated dynamic lighting system. Eventually, they're going to be phasing out the legacy format for this updated one, so you'll want to keep an eye on that. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys the legacy version for the reason that I know it way more than the other option, and I because I've used it so long in other campaign that I have never really switched to the updated one. Now, looking at it, you guys can take a look at it. You'll notice that it largely makes sense from what you see. You'll see that it says, it gives you a little blurb to say, hey, look, we're kind of still testing this. It's in active development. We'll eventually be turning legacy off. So you may want to make sure that you kind of learn this one. Make sure if you have revealed areas in one system, they're not going to be revealed in the other, but you're really going to just want to stick to one, is so that you don't confuse yourself. You'll notice under the advanced options you have token vision. Gives the players the ability to see, gives them night vision if they have the ability to do that. You can make them emit light if they have a torch. All of these options are in the legacy format, but it's a little more visually, at least in terms of the UI, easier to, I guess, digest with this updated tab. But we're not going to play with that one. I'm going to show you the legacy format, because if you can wrap your mind around the legacy format, once you go back here with your new knowledge in your brain and take a look at these options again, it'll be that much simpler for wrapping your mind around it if you want to switch to the advanced way. So, here is Rinkaz. I want him to be able to have sight. But I want dynamic lighting to work on this map. Before you do anything in terms of editing options for the character token, you're going to want to go to your page toolbar. Go to whatever your map you are currently on, or page if you want to call it that, and go to page settings. I mentioned this in our last session. You're going to scroll down, and similarly you're going to notice that there's two tabs now. There's the legacy rules down below, or there's dynamic lighting over here. So again, we're going to be sticking to the legacy format. So staying on page details tab, you're going to scroll down and you'll notice dynamic lighting. Of course, they put a similar blurb to be like, hey, use this while you can, but it's going to be gone. I'm going to click dynamic lighting. That's going to enable it. You have a couple options when you do that. So whatever dynamic lighting you built using our shapes that we did with our bright green and bright red, that's now going to enable those to actually be places you can't see past. So you have the option. You can build out dynamic lighting for a map and not even use it until you choose to. It doesn't have to automatically kick in. When I'm using dynamic lighting and I have it enabled, I have three options. I can enforce line of sight, and again, if you just mouse over any of these check marks, Roll20 does a pretty good job of cluing you in as what they are. So enforce line of sight means that the player's line of sight is set by what tokens they can control. So they can only see from the vision of the tokens they control. Only update on drop. That basically means, and there's not a tooltip for this one, but it basically means that as you move your tokens around, the Roll20 system has to update that line of sight for that token, and it has to render that each and every time that you move that token a little bit. And that can actually use up a lot of, I don't know if you'd want to call it memory on the Roll20 server, but it can slow things down. Especially if you have people who like to actually grab their token with their mouse and slowly move it somewhere. So to ease the burden, you can checkmark the box that says only update on drop. And what that means is, if Ringkaz wants to move from this main area in the altar down this hall that we don't have a picture for, but we created dynamic lighting for, down this hall, his vision for what he can see will only update once he has, once he clicks that token and begins to move it. It's only going to update once he lets go of that click and the token drops. And that's a great way to save on letting the token have to render everything it sees as he drags the token down. Something to keep an eye on, because you'll notice as you're using dynamic lighting, depending on how many tokens you have set with their own vision, things can slow down. You'll want to be at least do your best to be conservative for how many things have sight, because each of those things that have sight, it has to render a separate form of dynamic lighting for that. And if you have a lot of players like I do with 6 different versions of dynamic lighting, that means that the Roll20 system has to render that many versions, and it may start to slow things down. So you want to be mindful of that, because you could notice, especially on your player's end, but also on your end, that things are moving a little slower, and you don't want that to hamper the experience. Global illumination. Let's say, man, I want to use dynamic lighting, but I don't want everything to be dark. They're just in, a mountainous region between two. They're in a fissure area and surrounded by 2 walls. So I want to make some dynamic lighting to cover the walls so they can't see past them. But it's not like they're in the dark. It's in the middle of day. It's a sunny mountainous area. Global illumination makes it so that instead of darkness it shows light in all players the characters can see. So similarly, in our campaign on Horzotus, I created a lot of dynamic lighting so that you guys couldn't see into those buildings. However, anywhere outside of them, down the roads or anything else, I had global illumination on, because although it was dim light, you guys could still see in this place. It wasn't dark. So I just turned global illumination on. So if your characters are in a forest, and maybe you want to create some dynamic lighting for the trees, but it is daytime, you'll want to set global illumination. That way, it doesn't matter how far your characters can see. They'll be able to see as far as they can, besides the things that get in the way of their line of sight that you've created with your shapes. Also, underneath that, we have 2 more options. We have restrict movement. And what that means is it stops players from being able to move their tokens through dynamic lighting walls. And basically, that's a great way for... To me, it's less of thinking my players are going to try and cheat, because they can't see through those walls anyway. I like to just have this option turned on so that they don't accidentally, grab their token and move it through a wall by accident. And now they're in a completely other room, and they all of a sudden see 30 enemies staring over at them, and they're like, oh my god, and it was a mistake. And now they have the knowledge of that, and it makes the role playing a little difficult, because they're like, well, shit, now I as a player know there's monsters over there. So I like to have this option turned on. You don't have to. Darkness and opacity, that again controls, what you can see versus your players. The GM can see through dark areas hidden from the players using Fog of War, Advanced Fog of War, and we'll go over those options later, or dynamic lighting. You can adjust the opacity of those dark areas, and this only affects the GM, so we'll just leave that as the standard of the ones that it's currently on. So for Ringkaz, let's go into your Advanced tab, Ringkaz, and give you some sight. Now you have some sight clicked on your box under the Advanced tab with an angle of 360 degrees. You could edit that, but Ringkaz is a smart lizard man. He can turn and swivel his head so he can see in a 360 degree. The multiplier is times 20, but you could always change that. Now you may be wondering yourself, especially if you're a GM, you're like, I think I've set everything up right, and I think I've played with the options to get this token right, but I want to make sure I can test it, because I'd hate to bring my players to this dark mine and unbeknownst to me, they can just fully see the map. That would suck. So an easy way to see those options is select the token you want as a GM and hit Control L. That will give you the same thing, the same vision that character sees. Now currently, currently if I do that for Ringkaz, he can't see shit besides his own token. And I want to make sure and change that, because I want him to be able to see the room around him. So I'm going to go over to has sight, and the angle, emits light. This can be used for a number of different things. For example, you can use emits light, for example, if Rinkaz has a torch in his hand. I myself like to use it as their range of vision. So naturally, I don't think there's any rules for just what your normal vision lets you see up to. But we're gonna just say that you're in a dark altar and you have nothing else lighting things up. So you have two options under emits light. The first one is their light radius, and the second one, which is an optional option, is the start of how much things start to get dim. And the last one, of course, is the angle. And if Rinkaz is holding like a torch, you can click the option underneath it that says all players see light, so that if someone pulls out a torch, or if someone casts some fire in their hand to light things up, you could click this option so that everybody can see it besides his lone token. So once you give them any amount of light emission at all, it allows them to see a little bit further based on their multiplier. So you could change that multiplier down to like 5. And you'll notice that things get much more dim as you do. You can change it down to 1. So this counts as... this multiplier doesn't count for feet, it counts for squares. So you'll notice for Rinkaz, I set his light radius to 5 and to 0 for the dim. So it's going to go out to 5. If you don't have anything for the dim, he's going to be able to see out as a solid light circle 5 and not much beyond that.
Interesting.
I like to give a little bit more of an immersion, so I like to put 0 so that there's a little bit of a dim, so there's not this just weird circle surrounding him. So there we go, right there. And you're able to see all this stuff, right, Rinkaz?
Correct. Yeah, I'm watching a little bit more on the Twitch side of things today.
Mm-hmm.
Get switching back and forth. It's really helpful. It's almost like having my own version of GM layer and player layer.
And some of the stuff that I'm explaining, some of these options, is sometimes difficult to wrap your mind around. And sometimes you just forget. I forget constantly every time I go to set up a new map with dynamic lighting what all these options are. So just go in there and again, play. Throw a token down before you start a campaign with your players. Grab all of their tokens, throw them on the map that has dynamic lighting, and play. You'll especially want to play with their tokens because there's plenty of options depending on the tabletop game that you're playing. But especially in D&D, you're going to want to make sure you have those tokens set correctly because there's a whole lot of player options in terms of not only the race, but special abilities, features they may have, items they may have on that may give them special sight that you're going to want to keep in mind. Rinkaz is a lizard folk with no particular special ability. My players have some cool magic tattoos and stuff. But I think Rinkaz, you just have normal vision. And that's a little different compared to someone like Nvidi, who's our half-elf, because he has, I believe, either dark vision, or I'm pretty sure it's dark vision, up to, I think, something like 60 feet. So you'll want to make sure and change those elements. So for now, as we're looking at on the stream, there's Rinkaz. I can hit Control L. He can only see out to a space of 5. And I've created it so that he can see out to 5, but the dim immediately starts at 0, which is his, at the center point of his token. So it kind of gives it more of a natural look where he can barely see outside of this area. So there is that right there. You could always change it and say just like 1 and make it like, I don't want you to see beyond the hand next to you. And it'll actually do that. Despite this being a 5x5 like foot grid map, you can change the emits light feet to 1 and there. Now that when we look at his token, he can't see shit. He can barely see the tiles around him, and that's it. Maybe you want your players to have a little bit of sight, so you hit 5 and there. Now he can at least see adjacent to him, but nothing beyond that. So all players see light, yada yada yada. And again, this multiplier will show how much they can just see. So maybe he's emitting light, but he can naturally see out further than that. So I could just change this to and again, this is by feet, so let's say 5. And that's where he can now see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And maybe we can edit this down a little bit so I can kind of give you a better idea of what that looks like. So there we go. Now he's emitting light, and because he's emitting light, we gave him sight with a multiplier of 3. So he can now see up to 3 spaces out before things begin to get dim. This is a great way you're thinking, well, what's the difference between the multiplier with him having sight and him emitting light? As far as I know, you have to have emitting light on, and you can put that as low as you want. And you have to have them with the ability to have sight for that to work. Of course, you can edit the angle of this. If you wanted to change it, I could just give him sight with 180 degrees, for example. And he would only be able to, let's see, should only technically see out that far. But maybe it's because he's emitting light. I'm not too sure. Let's see. No, it's in the dark. See, again, you may have to play with this yourself. I'm not the master of this. But let's change this back to 5. And change this back to 360. Also, I don't find myself ever changing the angle of the sight of the character. If anything, I change the effect of the light that they're emitting. So, they may have a torch in their hands. And I believe, at least, let's go into the rules over here and do torch. Or you know what? This isn't an actual D&D game, so we're not going to get the kind of journal that we can use. So I'm just going to pop over to Roll20 using the compendium that we talked about in our first session. A torch burns for 1 hour, providing bright light in a 20-foot radius and dim light for an additional 20 feet. I can simulate that in this game. I can let Slim only have sight with a multiplier of 1, and that only lets him see adjacent to himself. Now I could just leave that as his natural vision, but I also want him to emit light. And let's say that Slim playing Rinkaz says, well, I want to crack open a torch. Cool. Let's set that. I know that up to 20 feet he has bright light, and then the additional 20 feet he has dim light. And I can simulate that in here. I can make the light radius 40 feet because that's the total, 20 of bright light, 20 of dim, and I can start the optional dim at 20. And we'll leave it 360. So now, because this is a smaller room, he has, full vision. But as you notice, as we move his token around, and you can count these squares here, 5, 10, 15, 20, at the end of that 20 feet, that bright light becomes dim light.
Sorcery.
You can simulate that with a torch. Now, if you want to get real crazy, and this is something that me and Slim have done in the past, Slim, and this can work for homebrew and D&D if you use guns or any type of thing that sort of projects a beam of light, or maybe you're playing a more modern or even futuristic game where your characters have flashlights on their weapons. Slim has a torch on his weapon, which essentially is like a light. It's a crystal that emits out a light. It's basically the old world analog of a weapon that has a flashlight attached to it. And we have used this option before where Slim is like, well, I want to have my vision, but I also want to have the ability to turn on this light so I could look around a room. I think you had the crazy ability with your torch to see up to like 120 feet.
Yeah, it was something stupid.
So let's even do that. I did emits light 120 feet, and I'm going to start the dim at 60. But if I just do that and save it, he's going to be able to see everything. And he's going to be able to see all around him. And that's not what we're looking for. If you've seen any type of crime or drama show, or maybe like a horror thing when someone goes into the room, or if you have actually lived in real life and gone into a dark room with a flashlight, it doesn't light everything up. It's not like a lamp. It's only going to light where you're pointing the light. And we want to simulate that. So we don't want it to be like a torch. So right now he can see everything. We don't want that. We only want it to be like a beam out. So we're going to leave these options the same, 120 feet and 60 feet, but for the angle, we're going to change that to something like 15 and see what that does. Now you'll notice that he has the similar range that he can see of 120 and 60, but now he is only able to see through this beam of a 15-degree angle. And similarly, a cool thing that your player can do with access to his token as he moves around is if Rinkaz has his light out and he's looking around and he wants to kind of take a look around, he can just select his token and grab the rotation nodule at the top and just turn his token, and he'll be able to see what's around him as he moves. You may have to uncheck the box that says update on drop, otherwise that may be an option that doesn't appear for them. But as long as you don't have that checked, wherever he rotates this token, he can look around. So it makes this really awesome effect of Rinkaz using the flashlight on his gun to kind of flash it around the room, and almost like a horror-esque, like he's turning through the room before you finally, shine your light on the monster over in the corner type of thing.
Which has happened, and it's actually been pretty beneficial for mood and setting, because when he's done that before, we were in a big room and there was pillars blocking line of sight, and with the pillar blocking the line of sight, I couldn't get the light around it. I could only see maybe around the corners of it, and I see the border of an outline of a creature. I had no clue what it was, and I hear the rest of the party screaming on the other side. It actually, Glace was screaming, "Oh my god, what is that?" And I'm like, "I don't know, I can't see it." So it affected my movements as a player. I mean, that's one thing we've talked about in our time playing D&D and 5e. It's good to catch your players with their pants down sometimes, because the way the system works, even for this and some of the other gaming systems, you can be pretty overpowered. If you only have 1 or 2 encounters for your players, they're going to blow all their cooldowns, with no worries, and it's not going to be that much of a fun of a fight for either side. Well, when you have to spend 1 or 2 rounds trying to get over to something or see it or find it without being, a control freak, and he warped through the walls. I mean, the setting itself helps out, and that's actually helped pace me from doing stupid amounts of damage when I can't see the monster or I'm not sure what's there, and we actually have to communicate as players, which is kind of fun. I mean, it's almost like one of those, I guess, escape rooms in that sense. You have to communicate with who you're working with, or you're not gonna, progress.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. And you guys will notice, even though I am not control L-ing any of these tokens, you can actually still see, with a little bit of transparency, their sight.
I had a question. The area where you see my spotlight. Let me click on it real. Beaming out to. Say right there. I know you have a um, wall from I saw on the other side. You did with green. Is there a way for you to cut just right there? So, I mean, I guess the example of almost like you're walking into a church and the only light that comes in are through those stained glass windows. Is there a way to, I mean, say it's a straight line, crop off the sides there to make it just like an open window for light to come in?
Oh yeah. I drew a complete line around this area, but wherever you draw your lines is going to create that physical impasse where your characters can't see. So you don't have to draw a solid line from one end to the other. For example, I can go back into my dynamic lighting, and I'm just going to pick Polygon Line Tool, and then I'm going to do this right here. And when you're drawing with your line tool, it's going to keep making points for you until you stop it. And if you want to, like we did right here, I made a purple line that just is 5 feet long, and I want to do another one, but I don't want them to connect. Right click, and that'll stop it. And you'll notice it'll kind of gray out and go behind your grid, which, as I mentioned before, means that it's kind of complete. So let's draw another one right here, and I'm control clicking so that it snaps to the grid, and right click. So now let's take that off. Let's go back to our selection here. Now with
I can
Rinkaz's
see it.
icon, as he shines his light, he can't see past those points. So yeah, you can make any shape that you want. And similarly, you can get rid of these like you can anything else.
That's cool.
A great thing that I like to do is, like Rinkaz was mentioning, it's great in D&D when you run into a monster to... It's great to have awesome character art, you know, that you can showcase, especially in something like Roll20, because we have that visual medium to do so. But of course you want to provide a explanation of what that monster looks like, how their movements are, what they smell like, to help paint that visual picture. I try to do that when I can, but I like to do it a little bit differently, and this may be kind of a GM tip for anybody out there. If you're playing with dynamic lighting and you want to sort of up the scare factor, or just bring up the tension, because everyone has their own sight, and if you have detailed enough character token art, like you don't, if it's not detailed enough and you want to explain some, have at it. But let's say we use our dragon buddy over here, and Rinkaz is going to see this, but Glacé down here, because she's around the corner, is not. And because of that, when Rinkaz uses his light and is moving it through the room and then sees this, all I like to say is, Rinkaz, you see that. And I don't say anything else. And he's able to certainly make knowledge checks. He can roll die to see what it is. But it just gives him the impression of that thing that he sees. And that's a lot of fun, because all of the other characters, Glacé, for example, we can go to her vision. She has no idea what Rinkaz is looking at. I haven't explained it. I only let Rinkaz see the token art and draw conclusions from that. And that, similar to what Slim is saying, is a lot of fun, especially in more tense moments, because your players will see something and they'll freak out, but everyone else, you know, depending on where they are, might not be able to see it. And so they're just like, what is it? What is it? And it's a great way to build tension. So yes, let's go back and change your sight to just be 360. Let's just leave it at like 20 and start to dim at 10. So you'll notice, Slim, that your token, because I put that red line down here that serves as a door down at the bottom, you can't see past that point. And Glacé is actually right on the other side, but she can't see past it either, because let's actually give her some more vision too. Let's do hers as 2010. She cannot see past that area either. And if you guys remember, that's because I drew a door. And it was just a line that I did in red, separate from the green walls. And the reason I did it separate is, let's say that Slim walks his token up and says, I want to, you know, very slowly open this door. You can say, all right, so I'm going to go back to my dynamic lighting. I'm going to select that red line I drew for the door and just delete it. And now you will notice with your characters, and especially you if you go back to look at their vision, that now they can see each other. Rinkaz pushes open the door, and down below he sees Glacé. And similarly, Glacé is like, oh, okay, it's just Rinkaz, and they can run up. So that's a great way to reveal areas for them. And if you ever want to cover them up, you know, Rinkaz sees the dragon down the hall, and he says, I want to slowly close the door again. You can just as easily go back into your polygon line tool and just redraw it. And there it is. His right click, his vision is cut off. So it is very malleable how you want to build things. Again, similar to how many tokens you have on your map that have their own line of sight, you also may want to keep in mind how many objects you're putting on the map that will have to create and render your line of sight too. You know, try to scale down and you know, don't go overboard. You know, if you have a room that is full of 50 pillars, maybe you want to reconsider drawing line of sight for all 50 of those pillars, because not only is it going to be difficult for your players to see, but it's also going to be a resource hog for Roll20. It's going to slow things down for both you and your players. So just keep those in mind. It's always a good idea for you, the DM, to test these things out before, especially with dynamic lighting. You'd hate to build this cool cavern and put your characters on that map, your players, their tokens on that map, and then you forgot to do this one thing and they can see everything. That always sucks. So just test it out. You have the ability to see in any of their visions using Control L. Build it out so that you know it works, and use these tools.
The Great Gorebeard had a question.
Mm-hmm. Oh, hey, what's up?
So, can you do other shapes with the blocking of the lighting? Like
Yeah.
Can you, other than the lines? Like I saw the lines when you did those, but can you do is there preset shapes that you...
So because it has to render the lighting to make sure that it doesn't have to render, it's restrictive on that because it doesn't want you to draw like a spiked sun, and then the resources of Roll20 are like, oh shit, we have to draw the vision of each tip of these spikes. So it does take away your freehand tool and only lets you use polygons or lines or draw shape. But you could still use polygons and lines to be like, I want to draw this weird ass shape right here, this kind of triangle thing. And then similarly, if we go back to Slim's token and Control L, he can't see past it. So you can kind of make shapes, you just can't use the freehand tool.
Oh, I see. Okay, that changes that there. That's kind of cool. I just was curious, like if you did do like some sort of window, like you was talking about the stained glass, like what you could actually do as far as that goes.
Yeah, you could go just like you could draw a little bit of a line, leave some space to have light come through, a little bit of a line, etc., and build that out for sure. Okay, that is really the tall and short of dynamic lighting. There is obviously more to get into on it. I'm sure you may have further questions thinking about it in the future, Slim, as well as the players. And I know I didn't touch on the dynamic lighting that is updated that Roll20 has introduced. But again, I want you to wrap your mind around the legacy version, and just honestly, that's the version that I'm the most comfortable with, because if you understand that, now that it just from me explaining that stuff to you, if we go back up to our page toolbar and open our page settings and go over to the dynamic lighting page over here, all this stuff right here makes a whole lot more sense, especially when I go to like the character token and go over to dynamic lighting. Now you see the vision, the night vision, emits bright light, low light, all of this stuff we just played with. We just did it in a little bit more of a crunchy fashion.
See, and I came in tonight thinking, oh, this will probably be the last one. We probably don't have too much more from just the basic to unpack. And 2 hours later, we're like, look, we found some of the tools, how to move our character, and here's an hour and a half on lighting. Holy cow.
I was going to say, I think it may be a good point to wrap up here. And then if you're up for it, Slim, we can probably do one more where we'll play with the rest of the tools in the toolbar. And then if we have some free time, maybe we just kind of build a map with some of the elements we've talked about before. What do you think?
That'd be fun. I'd actually like to... the wife got me a pack of maps and bits like you have these smaller squared 30 by 30 pieces and some slim hallways, and she got me a huge pack of these from a Kickstarter, and she's like, all we have to do is just drop them in, and I'm like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do this weekend, is at least just get a few pieces on it so I can mess with it and get used to it, because I was like, oh, there's a good amount here. There's like 10 different settings and each one has 30 pieces, so I feel like I have enough to build a huge map already. So I think that would be fun to practice with it, and then do a build and play on my end while I'm
that'd be a lot of fun. Yeah, we can go through the rest of the tools here. Maybe we build a map over here in my game, or maybe if you want some, we can either on stream, or if you want to set something up before next week's stream and maybe I come in as a player and take a look around. It's up to you.
To see my homework.
yeah, I'd be fine with that. So yeah, I think that'll wrap it up, because I do want to take some time to go over the rest of this stuff. We'll do one more session of this. I hope you guys found it helpful. Do you have any other questions or anything in the meantime, Slim?
I don't know if we stretch it out to one more. This is a college class, so let's go.
Good. Yeah, I know these are definitely real in depth, and maybe even more so than probably what official Roll20 has out there. They're probably like, who the hell wants to sit around for like 4 sessions of 2 hours? But you're getting the in-depth preview, and not even preview, the in-depth view from a player and DM alike. Slim is definitely DM'd, but he's kind of helping wrap his mind around Roll20, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to do this, to help him out with, and maybe help out anybody out there who's trying to get a grip on Roll20 in general. Even if you're just a player, it's kind of fun to kind of understand and get a peek behind the screen. So hopefully it was helpful to you guys. If you have any further questions, like I said at the beginning of the stream, throw me a DM on Twitch if you watch the video on demand, or on YouTube, leave a comment, or just hit me up on Twitter with your question if you have anything. I'll be making sure to post when this episode goes up. The video on demand is usually up within a day or two on Twitch, and then I usually will cut it up and take some time to get it ready for YouTube. And I think I'm going to do the rebroadcast. What do you think, next Tuesday at 8, Slim?
Sounds good.
I'll do the rebroadcast over on YouTube at around 6, so you can watch that first if you're interested, and then hop on over for our final stream. And then again, all of our previous videos on this, this is the third one now, you can find those on our Twitch or on our YouTube page. All of that stuff is GAWD_mode. If you're interested to watch us actually play some D&D, stop by. That's pretty much like our only piece of content on our Twitch channel on YouTube right now, is besides this is playing some D&D, because I wanted to make sure and stream it, although I may get into streaming some other stuff. We'll be doing that. We do it every Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern time, so come stop by, follow us as you watch and interact. You build up Twitch channel points, and we're not just one of those streams that just has it, with the basic rewards of just make the streamer smile. No, we've got some cool stuff where you can give the players inspiration, give them bonuses to their rolls, buy them weird bit packages that you can use for fun stuff. You can summon the weird, which last session turned Rink has his arms into noodles. So all kinds of crazy stuff that's a lot of fun. So yeah, come interact with us, follow us. I love getting more of an audience, and check us out over on Twitter. And yeah, we'll be back next week, back on Tuesdays, which was our normal streaming time for this, to our last session of going over the last bit. So hope everybody had fun and found this informational, and we will see you later. Goodbye, everybody.